So I know it's a holiday. Appreciate everyone coming on the holiday. I know it's like a million other things you could do on this weekend. So thank you for coming. This class, as you can see, the title of it is Krishna is the Real Shelter. It's based on a class that my Guru Maharaj gave. So I'm basically acting like a parrot and just repeating what he said, and I've just added some slides to go along with his lecture. I would like to thank Nilamani Prabhu for giving me the opportunity to speak to everyone today. I do not have qualifications to speak on this subject matter, so this is all for my own purification. Yeah. So with your blessings, we'll start with the invocation. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurumilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Radhanath Swami Iti Namine. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Iti Namine. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyata Deshadarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhaktavrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram 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 Hare Hare. Okay, so the topic for this class is taken from Srimad Bhagavatam, 6th canto, chapter 9, and this verse is verse number 43. And the title here is The Appearance of the Demon Vritrasura. So I'll just read the verse. I don't know the meter, so I'll just read through it. Ata eva swayam tad upakalya payasmakam bhagavata paramam gurustava charana satapala sachayam vivida vijina samsara parisramopalasamam upasratanam vayam yat kameno pasadita. The translation by His Grace Srila Prabhupada. Dear Lord, you are omniscient, and therefore you know very well why we have taken shelter at your lotus feet, which provides shade that gives relief from all material disturbances. Since you are the supreme spiritual master, you know everything. We have sought shelter at your lotus feet for instruction. Please give us relief by counteracting our present distress. Your lotus feet are the only shelter for a fully surrendered devotee and are the only means for subduing all the tribulations of this material world. Purport. One need only seek shelter of the shade of the lotus feet, of the Lord's lotus feet. Then all the material tribulations that disturb him will be subdued. Just as when one comes under the shadow of a big tree, the disturbances caused by the heat of the scorching sun are immediately mitigated without one's asking for relief. Therefore, the whole concern of the conditioned soul should be the lotus feet of the Lord. The conditioned soul, suffering from various tribulations because of existing in this material world, can be relieved only when he seeks shelter at the Lord's lotus feet. So, as I indicated on the previous slide, this relates to the pastime of the appearance of the demon Vritrasura. So just some very quick background on this pastime, just to set the scene. So Indra, he's the king of heaven, the king of the demigods, At one time, he offended his guru, Brihaspati, and subsequently he lost all of his powers. The demons, who are always envious, they conquered the demigods, including Indra, and they took the power from the demigods. And after that, seeking help from Lord Brahma, the demigods took help from Vishvarupa. Vishvarupa gave them a mantra to acquire something called the Narayan Kavacha shield, and that would allow them to defeat the demons again. Now, Vishvarupa, being inclined to the demons, he secretly gave them oblations, and because of that, Indra became very angry at him and severed his head. And by doing so, he created a situation where Vishvarupa's father, Twasta, in his anger, he created a sacrifice to kill Indra, and from that, Vritrasura, the demon, was born. Okay, so that's just a very quick background. I'll be going into it in more detail. So as you saw on the slide with the verse, the theme of this verse is shelter, right? And it talks about the tree giving shelter in the same way the Lord can give a shelter as well. Now, when we talk about shelter, what does that mean? Any suggestions? Protection, right? So in the lecture that Maharaj gave, he talks about a couple of different types of shelter that people seek. One of them, as I pointed on the first bullet, is physical shelter. So physical shelter involves things like protecting our health, right? That kind of gives us a shelter, a foundation. Similarly, wealth, right? If we build that financial, if we save our money, then we're okay if there's a rainy day comes, right? Or we lose our jobs, and we have that shelter, right? That financial shelter. And then similarly, knowledge. We go to school, we get degrees, we give ourselves that knowledge so that we have the skills so that we can support ourselves and our families. And then similarly, there's something called emotional shelter that we kind of look for. And that includes things like respect, adoration, glorification, recognition, things like that, right? So we look for those kinds of things. And Maharaj has explained that these are the kind of two types of shelter, physical and emotional. Now, everyone is seeking shelter through these opulences, and that includes the demigods as well. Now, if you see that picture at the bottom left corner, what do you see? And where is it? The one on the, yeah. So there's an idiom that goes with this, right? Fish out of water, right? So what does that, any suggestion like, what does that mean, fish out of water? Say again? Unprotected, yeah. So I'm looking for something slightly different though. Yes, I forget, somebody said comfort zone, yes. So when you're not in your comfort zone, when you're in an environment that's not natural to you, you're like a fish out of water, right? So that's us, right? We're spiritual beings, right? We are the soul. And we are in this world. We were originally, our original home is a spiritual world, where we are spiritual beings and we're living in the spiritual world. But now we're in a material world. So we're spiritual beings living in a material world, just like the fish out of water. When the fish is in the water, it's in its natural state. It can swim around, it can function normally. As soon as you take it out of the water, it's flailing around, flapping around, it's gasping for life, right? So it's not in its natural state. So the point here, the connection here is that we are spiritual beings and we're trying to find shelter in this material world by the points which I mentioned, the physical shelter, emotional shelter. We're trying to find shelter, and we're not able to get something that's permanent, right? Because what's the nature of the material world? Temporary. Everything is temporary. So whatever we kind of shelter we acquire, any money, any health, right? It doesn't last. It doesn't last beyond the age of this body, and even it goes before the end of this body, right? So we are trying to find shelter, and ultimately, what we want something. We want to seek pleasure, right? We're pleasure-seeking beings, right? In the spiritual world, our natural state is Satchidananda, which means we are full of knowledge, bliss, and we are eternal. So that bliss, right? We're so used to that bliss from the eternal spiritual world, and now we're in the material world, and we're not able to find that permanent or that eternal blissful state. So we're looking for that, but the foundation for that is shelter. And as explained in Bhagavad Gita, this material world is dukkha laya shashvatam, right? It means that this place is a place of misery, right? Suffering. It's by definition, right? So we can't, whatever we try to do to make this place enjoyable, fun, happy, right? It's ultimately going to fail, sorry. Because by definition, this is a place of suffering, right? And this verse from Bhagavad Gita even further illustrates that. Abrahma bhuvana loka punajar avartino jana mamu pechatu kaunteya punarjanma navidyate. From the highest planet in the material world down to the lowest, all are places of misery, wherein repeated birth and death take place. But one who attains my abode, O son of Kunti, never takes birth again. So coming back to the story, right? Indra, the king of heaven, he was, he has a lot of faults, right? There's not many pastimes where he makes mistakes, but he is supremely qualified to be the king of heaven and the king of the demigods, right? Because of his past karma and his qualifications. And this is a post he gets for life, right? It's not like he has to campaign and do elections and put flyers on people's lawns and say, please vote for me for king of heaven post, right? He gets that post for life, right? God gives him, the Lord Vishnu gives him that post. So he is very qualified and to have that post. And the demons, they are very envious of Lord Indra. And that's by nature, right? Asuras are envious. Devatas, they are not envious of him. But Indra, and also at the same time, the demigods and the Devatas, they are devotees of the Lord. But at the same time, Indra, even though he's a devotee, he still wants to enjoy his opulences, right? Enjoy the fruits of what he, his bhakti. It's called Kama Mishra Bhakti, or Bhakta. So, as I briefly touched upon at the beginning, he offended. So one time he was sitting in his palace, he was being worshipped by his subjects, and his guru, Brihaspati, entered the palace. He did not notice that Brihaspati had entered, and because of that, he failed to offer his respects and obeisances to Brihaspati, right? And Brihaspati took this offense. He was, this slight to him, and he immediately got up and left. And as soon as he left, Indra realized his mistake. He realized what happened, and he tried to go after Brihaspati to apologize. But by then, Brihaspati had already gone. And because of this offense, because of this neglect of Indra, he had to pay a price. He was somewhat, you can say, cursed by Brihaspati to lose all of his powers. So just for that moment of neglect, he lost all of his powers. Now, Maharaj in the lecture, he is connecting that point of neglect to our own lives, right? So a moment of neglect can ruin everything. So the Maharaja explained that one time he was walking past a devotee's house when Mataji was there in the kitchen. She was cooking over a stove. A few minutes later, he's walking back in the other direction, passing the house again, and the house is engulfed in flames. So what happened was, as Maharaj had passed that house, that Mataji who was cooking, she must have left the kitchen for a couple minutes or whatever it was. The curtains in the home or the kitchen must have, the wind blew the curtains over the flame and set the curtains alight. That triggered a fire. The house quickly became engulfed in flames. And by the time the fire department was able to put the fire out, the fire had been, the whole house had been burnt to cinders. It was basically charcoal. So just for that 1 minute of neglect, this Mataji lost her life, lost her home, right? And then similarly, he's explained that sometimes even he's heard stories where devotees fell asleep while driving, car accident, and not a happy ending, right? So just because we're devotees doesn't mean we're somehow immune to these things, right? These are things that can happen to anyone. But the point is, neglect. We have to be very careful not to be neglectful, and those things can happen. But in our spiritual life, we have to be extremely careful as well, not to be neglectful. So in our spiritual life, right, we have our sadhana, we have our chanting, we have to follow the 4 regulative principles and so on, right? And we have to be careful, right? Every time we do Mangalati, we say the 10 offenses to the holy name. And the first one of those is to not be offensive to other Vaishnavas and not to offend them. So if we are neglectful and we offend a Vaishnava, or we're offensively chanting, or commit some kind of offense, aparad, right? That can set us back a long way, right, in our spiritual life. We don't ever lose our progress, but we lose our progress becomes hidden from us. I want to explain that, but there is an impact to it. Even though we know we make mistakes, the mind, and all of us are guilty of this, including me, we try to justify what we've done, the mistakes we've done. We try to put the blame on someone else. Oh, it was that person's fault. Oh, they deserved it. Oh, whatever, right? But we don't want to take responsibility for our actions sometimes. And because of that, then we'll commit the same mistakes over and over again. So we have to own up to our mistakes, and we have to be careful not to be neglectful. So back to the story. Now, because Indra lost his power, as I mentioned, the demons, they're always looking out for an opportunity to take control and to conquer the demigods. And they saw this opportunity because Indra lost his powers, and now the demons were able to defeat and conquer the demigods. So now Indra and the demigods, they're in a bad situation. They go to Lord Brahma for help and guidance. Lord Brahma tells them, "You are foolish." He tells Indra, he chastised him, saying, "You are so foolish for failing to honor your spiritual master, and now look at this mess that you've gotten yourselves into." He advised them, go to Vishvarupa for help. Now Vishvarupa, one thing about him is that he's a Brahmana, but he's like a non-partisan person, right? Today we hear Democrats, Republicans, and nothing gets passed, no bills get passed because there's always this partisanship, right? Everyone votes for their party. But anyway, Vishvarupa was not like that. He was like a bipartisan person. He was not a political person, right? So he had friends and relatives on both sides, on the demonic side and on the Devata side. So having said that, the demigods and Indra went to him and Vishvarupa gave them the instructions on how to acquire the Narayan Kavacha, right? And this is a shield. And this Narayan Kavacha is nothing but a shield that is generated through remembrance of the Lord and his holy names, and that generates a shield. So you can see how powerful remembrance of the Lord is and his holy names. It can create this very powerful shield. And using that shield, they would be able to overcome and defeat the demons again. Now, as I mentioned, Vishvarupa was also inclined to the demons, and he was secretly giving oblations to the demons. Indra got wind of this. He found out that this happened, and this is his second big mistake. He got extremely incensed, angry, and he severed the head of Vishvarupa. Vishvarupa had just given them the Narayan Kavacha, helped them out, and because of that, what he felt was an offense by giving oblations to demons, he took his head off. So this is the second mistake of Indra. And because of that, Twasta, who was Vishvarupa's father, he became very angry at Indra and he wanted to kill him. So he went about performing a sacrifice that would allow him to kill Indra. Well, when you perform these sacrifices, you have to be very careful to say the mantras in the perfect way. Otherwise, they can have the sacrifice can have unintended consequences or results. And that's exactly what happened. He said he did the sacrifice, and instead of having the intended result to kill Indra, he created Vitrasura, the demon, the gigantic demon. And this demon became the enemy of Indra. Now, the verse that I've quoted there on the slide is from 263, Bhagavad Gita. Krodat bhavati samoha, samohat smriti vibramaha, smriti brahmsat buddhi naso, buddhi nasat pranasyati. From anger, delusion arises, and from delusion, bewilderment of memory. When memory is bewildered, intelligence is lost, and when intelligence is lost, one falls down again into the material pool. So the connection here with this verse is that Indra, because of his anger that he wasn't able to control, he went about and then he went and killed Vishvarupa. So, and the connection to our own lives is that we have to be very careful not to allow lust and lust for material sense objects to allow us to become too attached and to generate that anger and to create this spiral, downward spiral that is explained here, right? So we should not be trying to create our own vitrasuras in our own lives, right? So we have to be very self-controlled and control our senses. Okay, so there's another saying here, right? Digging your own grave. Who's heard this one? And what does it mean? Yeah, creating problems for your own self, right? You're kind of generating your own demise. So when we talk about getting reactions to our offenses, right? And this is explained much more detail in Nectar of Devotion, but essentially you can suffer the reactions almost like immediately or sometime later or much later, right? So in this case, right, Indra suffered the reaction almost immediately, right? There was a direct cause and effect. But sometimes in our lives, we see situations of people, they commit crimes or they do something bad to somebody else, and they seemingly get away with it. And we think, how come, the Lord didn't punish that person? How come they seem to be getting away with it? Maybe they're righteous in some way. Maybe it was meant to be, right? and they're not supposed to be punished, right? But this is incorrect, right? We should understand that every single action has a reaction. When somebody doesn't suffer the reaction of their action immediately, and they say it's a sinful act, it means basically that the Lord is so disgusted with that person that he's allowing that person to dig their own grave, meaning allow them to accumulate sinful reactions over and over again until some point where he's going to have to pay for all of them in one go, right? You could take the example of somebody who shoplifts, right? They go in the store, they put something in their pocket, they walk out, they get away with it. They do it, and then they're like, okay, let me try this again. They do the same thing again, they get away with it. At some point, they may get caught, right? And at that point, they're going to get caught and punished for all of those previous times that they shoplifted. So that reaction may come tomorrow, it may come next week, it may come a few years from now, it may come at the end of your life, it may come in the next life, it may come 100 lives later. The problem is if it comes so much later that you forget, you lose that connection to what the original act was. One fine day, you may think, "Oh, I'm a great, I'm a sinless person. I'm a good person. I don't hurt anyone." And something bad happens to you, and you start to blame God. Like, "Oh God, why is God doing this to me? I haven't hurt anyone. There's all these criminals here doing all these crimes, and they're getting away with it. And look at me, I'm getting punished for nothing." Right? But if you have this perspective that, okay, you may have done something at some point, some previous time, right? Then you kind of can accept what has happened. So never think that someone's getting away with it. If you get an immediate reaction, think of it as a blessing, right? Because then you know, okay, I did A and I got B. So I know not to do A again, right? So B, it's a blessing when you get that immediate, instant karma. And Indra, as we said, he got this instant karma, right? He could see the mistake immediately, he got the reaction for both mistakes that he committed. That's because he's a devotee, so the Lord was giving him that benefit. Okay, so now, materialistic persons, generally, like we talked about shelter in the beginning, they can also take shelter of powerful people, such as politicians and doctors and like very powerful people. And they can also take this shelter of distractions in their life. Like I've got a picture of, in the top right corner of brain, and you can see like social media. People take shelter of social media, right? It's an escape. Escapism is like when you trying to escape from your problems in this world by going into something else, like Bollywood movies, Hollywood movies, alcohol. Even people sometimes go to drugs and other things, right, to escape their problems in the world. That becomes their shelter. Devotees, though, they generally understand that the shelter is Krishna, right? Our only shelter is Krishna. But Maya is so strong that it can even divert us devotees, right? It's always ever present. Maya is always trying to sway us and take us in the wrong direction. So we have to be really, really careful. In the beginning, as devotees, right, we come to this movement. We may have come because of, and there are 4 reasons why people may come to the Lord, but generally, if they come from a situation of distress, they come to the Lord, they come to the temple, they're very careful not to commit offenses and aparadhs and sins, right? They're very enthusiastic. But over time, what happens is we become familiar with everything, right? Everything becomes routine, and we become lax, right? We become lazy, and we don't, we lose our focus. And because of that, we lose our fear of Maya. And Maya is always there, as I said, right? And it's very dangerous to lose that fear, right? We always need to be afraid of Maya, because if we don't, then we become neglectful. Even Srila Prabhupada, right? Like the purest devotee, he would even pray himself that he would not be fall down and become affected by Maya, right? Someone who's so pure and 24/7 in Krishna consciousness, he was always aware and wary of the presence of Maya in the world and its potential impact. So what to speak of us, right? We should always so be very wary and careful of Maya. And then Prabhupada also, there's some quotes that he says, you Westerners, the problem with you is that you don't fear Maya. And then when he talks about Westerners, he's talking about all of us, right? We are actually Westerners. We're living in the West. And even if we're living in India, culturally we're impacted by Western culture anyway. So when he talks about that, he's talking about everyone. That we're all not afraid of Maya enough, and we need to be. Therefore, Prabhupada in his books, he talks a lot about this material world and it being a place of suffering and all the different types of suffering that we encounter, right? He wants to instill that fear in us. We should have that healthy fear. Because if we don't have enough fear, we won't take its sincere shelter of the Lord. And this verse is from Bhagavad Gita. It talks about the modes of material nature. Devi Esha Gunamai Mamamai Durateya Mameva Ye Prapadyante Mayam Etam Tarantite. This divine energy of mind, consisting of the three modes of material nature, is so difficult to overcome, but those who have surrendered unto me can easily cross beyond it. All right, so now we have, who is this? Everyone knows Bill Gates, right? So he's like a super mega billionaire, right? He makes more money in a few seconds than we make in our entire lifetime. Right? Every second he's probably making millions of dollars. He's extremely powerful. He has so much wealth, more than he would ever need, right? On the other hand, we have the demigods. Now, demigods like Indra, compared to the demigods, Bill Gates is like one of those guys, when you stop at the traffic light and they clean your windscreen, right? And you give them a buck, even though you don't want to, right? So that's Bill Gates compared to demigods. His wealth is zero compared to the wealth that, say, Indra has, right? Indra has so much wealth, it's hard to even fathom, right? Despite that, the demigods, and we see earlier, the demigods still surrender and take shelter at the lotus feet of Vishnu, right? Despite all their opulences, all their power, all the wealth that they have, they understand, because they're devotees, that they have to take shelter at the lotus feet of the Lord. What to speak of people like Bill Gates and even the more insignificant people like us. So in the 10th canto, the demigods, they pray that anyone who looks for shelter anywhere but your lotus feet is taking shelter of a boat in the ocean that is made out of stone. So that's what I've tried to show in that picture in the bottom left corner, is a ship made of stone, right? A ship made of stone is not going anywhere fast. Right? Okay, so now what do we see? Obviously a tree. And there's a bunch of people under it. Okay, so in the purport that I read earlier, it explains that the trees give shade from the scorching heat to anyone that takes that shelter of the tree, right? And do we have to ask the tree, please give me shade, right, when we stand under it? No, right? Like it's automatic. As soon as we stand, we take shelter of the tree, we get that shelter. So usually, when we go to the temple on Sundays, when everything's nice and happy and we have no problems in our life, right? We come and see Krishna, we say, "Hi Krishna, how are you?" You know, it's all very kind of pleasant, right? We bow down and we're not sincerely begging for shelter, right? But when we do have calamities in our life, right? That's when we come into the temple, we bow down, we pray very sincerely, right? Very seriously to the Lord. So that's the problem. We only go to the Lord sincerely and take shelter when we have that dire need, right? We have that calamitous situation. We don't realize that we're always in danger. Maya's always there. Anything is around the corner. So we should have that mindset of sincerely seeking shelter at all times. This verse from Bhagavatam, Canto 1, is prayers of Queen Kunti. The translation is that I wish, I'll read the verse. Vipada santu tasashvat tatra tatra jagat guru bhavato darshanam yakshat apunar bhava darshanam. I wish that all those calamities would happen again and again so that we could see you again and again. For seeing you means that we will no longer see repeated births and deaths. So Queen Kunti is explaining that due to calamities, the Pandavas and Queen Kunti, they would pray for Lord Krishna's protection and seek his shelter, and that's when they would see him. And by constantly doing this, we become free from this cycle of birth and death. And I just mentioned, right, there are 4 types of people that usually approach the Lord. And those are the distressed, the desirers of wealth, the inquisitive, and the seekers of truth. So seekers of truth and the inquisitive are more rare of the 4. Most commonly, people who are in distress or seeking wealth are the ones that approach the Lord. Now, on the right side, we see a picture of Jagai and Madai, right? And that pastime, right? So they were the most sinful of people. They committed every crime in the book. But when they ultimately surrendered to Lord Nityananda and Lord Chaitanya, they become great devotees. And every year now, there's millions of people that go and take pilgrimage at the Samadhi of Madai, right? Because he became such a great devotee. So sometimes people who come from a situation of suffering and like that, they become even better devotees because they understand how precarious this material world is. Now, the second pastime that relates to this concept of shelter is this one. The Brahmana thief plans to rob Lord Nityananda Prabhu. Now, this is a weird picture. I couldn't find a picture of this pastime. So now in the new world of AI, you can explain the picture you want and it generates an image for you. So that's kind of what I did. They didn't have guns in those days. So anyway, so at one time, Lord Nityananda, he was staying in Navadvip. And this was at the request of Sachi-mata. So she was missing her son, Nimai. So she asked Lord Nityananda to stay there. And while Lord Nityananda was staying in Navadvip, he used to wear very opulent clothes and jewelry. And these jewels are really expensive jewels, like diamonds and pearls and everything, right? So he would walk around always like this. In Navadvip, at the same time, there was a very cruel Brahmana. He was basically a dacoit, a robber, but he was very powerful because of his Brahminical background. He became so powerful that he became sort of like a king in Navadvip. He found out about Lord Nityananda and Lord Nityananda having all of these jewels. And he told his associates, look, if we steal all these jewels from this Nityananda, we'll be set for life, right? there's so much value on these jewels, we will never have to work another day again, right? So they made a plan to rob Lord Nityananda of these jewels. They sent a spy to associate with Lord Nityananda and his associates so they could understand his whereabouts. So one time they were staying at the home, Lord Nityananda and his associates, they were at the home of Hiranya Pandit. And they were having prasadam at the home. Now when they were having prasadam, these dacoits, the robbers, this Brahmana thief, were outside the home waiting for the devotees inside to fall asleep, and then they would go in and attack. Meanwhile, Lord Nityananda, he's being the Supreme Lord himself, he understood what was going on. The devotees all inside were having prasadam, and they were in so much bliss from this prasadam that they kept eating and eating and eating, and this went on for hours and hours. Meanwhile, Lord Nityananda sent the goddess of sleep, Nidra Devi, to put these dacoits outside to sleep. So these dacoits, they fell asleep, and by the time they woke up, it was the next day, and it was daylight already. So they woke up, and they were all looking at each other, saying, who fell asleep? And they were all angry and blaming each other, pointing fingers. Ultimately, they said, look, let's make another plan to try again. Okay? More AI-generated images. So the second attempt, this time they decided, look, in order to be successful, we need to worship Durga Devi. And to worship Durga Devi, they had to collect things like meat and wine and blood and things like that, right? Gross things to please Durga Devi. So they did that, and then they gathered outside the house where Lord Nityananda was. And this time, they saw all these huge, gigantic gods standing outside of the house. And that's the picture on the left side. They were wearing garlands. They had these tridents. They looked massive, like each one of them could probably kill all the dacoits single-handedly. So the dacoits, they decided smartly that this was not a good time to attack. And they said, let's try one more time after 10 days. So they left. And now, 10 days later, they surrounded the house where Lord Nityananda was. And this time, what happened was suddenly they started becoming overcome by fever and blindness. Right? So they were becoming ill, they were becoming blind, and then Lord Indra, because he's a devotee of the Lord, he found out about their plan. So he attacked them as well with hailstones and cold and rain, and these hailstones are like big as rocks. Right? So they're being pelted by these hailstones. They're feeling sick, they're being blinded, and then there were thorny bushes around, so they're stumbling into these thorny bushes and being pricked by the thorns. On top of that, there were these mosquitoes flying around everywhere, biting them, and then there were scorpions stinging them. So they were like really suffering, and this was going on for hours, and they got to the verge of death, actually. And at this point, this Brahmana thief, he came to a realization that this Lord Nityananda was no ordinary person. And he came to realization that this must be the Supreme Lord. Because of all the events, right, because of how their plans never worked out, and all these events that transpired, he decided, I must surrender to Lord Nityananda. This is not just an ordinary rich person wearing jewels, this is the Supreme Lord. So he surrendered to Lord Nityananda. And as soon as he surrendered, all of these calamities, the weather and the scorpions and everything subsided, right? They got their vision back. The fever went away, right? So now this Brahmana thief felt so bad about what happened that he went to Lord Nityananda and he said, "Look, I feel so bad about what has happened and what of my sins. I will go and drown myself, right, to counteract the sinful reactions." And Lord Nityananda, being so merciful, told him, "No, you don't need to do that. All you need to do now is just promise that going forward that you respect all living beings and you take shelter of the devotees and you chant the Lord's holy names." So, and he agreed to do that. So finally, Lord Nityananda, he garlanded this Brahmana thief and he placed his lotus feet on top of the head of this Brahmana thief. And immediately all of his sinful reactions got washed away. And all of the devotees who were standing around chanted, "Hari Bol!" They were so happy. So what do we learn, to summarize from these two pastimes, right? We see that from the pastimes of the demigod and Lord Indra, that they had to go through so much suffering, and ultimately they came to the point where they had to surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead to get shelter. The demigods and Indra, right? They couldn't. Their weapons had no effect on Vitrasura. Right? Vitrasura was just swatting them like flies. Any weapon, even like Indra's thunderbolt weapon, right? That can smash any mountain to dust. But Vitrasura was just swallowing up these weapons. Right? It was just nothing to them. It was like a little kid fighting against an elephant. But ultimately, they got to the point where they couldn't do anything, and they had to take shelter of the Supreme Lord to get relief. Similarly, this Brahmana thief, he had to take shelter of Lord Nityananda. Otherwise, it would have been the end of him. So do we need to go through this immense suffering like these pastimes just to take shelter? Right? We don't, right? We should learn from the experiences of others, and that's why these pastimes exist in books like Srimad Bhagavatam, so that we can learn from the experience of others and learn from their mistakes. That's being intelligent, right? Why should we go through the same mistakes, right, when we see others and we can learn from them? And then the other point was about shelter, right? The physical shelter, the emotional shelter, those are ultimately not going to help us because we live in the material world and everything here is temporary. So we need to seek shelter at the lotus feet of the Lord. Love of God is the real love, right? Once we have love of God, we don't need things like respect, we don't need glorification, we don't need adoration. We don't need that because we have that love of God. That's enough for us, right? That's our pure and natural state. So when we have that, we don't need those things anymore. And in this age of Kali, right, the prescribed form of shelter that we can get from the Lord is in the form of His holy names. And we should be chanting this mantra all together. You can chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So with that, I'll end the class. Thank you so much. If there's any questions.
Any comments or questions?
Okay. Thank you so much. I think we'll be having prasadam outside.
Shri Gaurita ki. Let's thank Nandan